Thank you, Ashley, Joe, and Louise. And good morning and welcome to those of you who are joining us online today. We are in the last Sunday of January, and we're coming to the conclusion of our Christmas theme. Now, you might be saying, really? Christmas was like a month ago? It's about time we get over the Christmas theme. But one of the reasons I have kind of played with the Christmas theme this entire month is to remind ourselves that the Christmas story that we find in the Bible is not only a story in the Bible, but it is also an archetype of our soul. In other words, it is something that we all share on our spiritual journey, and that moment is the awakening to our divine nature. And so we found over the course of these last couple weeks that, you know what, the Christmas story can be found in a lot of places. Number one, in the music that we sang at Christmas time. What child is this? A great, great thought to ponder. And then we looked at a movie, The Miracle Worker, in the moment when Helen Keller had that incredible spiritual awakening, that birth within her, that feeling and that sensation with the fingers tapping on her hand and the water flowing over her other hand, that they were one and the same. And then we looked at the movie Julie and Julia, where two women who live very different lives came to the conclusion and they finally answered the question for themselves, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? And last Sunday, we looked at poetry as a Christmas story. When we looked at the poem of Mary Oliver as she left us with that haunting question, what do you want to do with your one wild and precious life? What do you want to do? These are variations on the Christmas story. You see, because the Christmas story really is the story about creation. It is the story about the birth of our creative nature. And when we begin to get that, we begin to see the Christmas story in many different ways, shapes, and forms. This idea that we are all born creative, and our job in life, if you will, is simply to create a life. That's our creativity. See, what happens all too often is that we begin to think of creativity as something that hangs at the Louvre, or as something we heard at the opera. It's something big and powerful and splashy, and therefore that's not me. But that's not what you were called to do. First and foremost, you are called to live and create a life that will demand daily your work and participation in it. And sometimes, we talked about this several weeks ago, we feel tears welling up inside of us. Tears for no apparent reason. We hear a song, we see a picture, we read a poem or whatever it might be, and we think, where are those tears coming from? And what we are looking at is that the creative nature of our soul lacks language. Our soul does not speak to us in words. So there is a gap between the great creative energy that we all have and the ability to articulate and manifest that energy. And so this gap, we're continually delving in to understand more of what it is to create this life. Taking opportunities that we never took before, saying yes to things that we only feel inside of us, or I could do that, or that's always interested me, and we begin to allow that creative nature to sort of work its way out. It is that longing of the soul that is trying to communicate to us. Life is more than this simplistic human form. And the only way we're going to know that is to create something beyond ourselves, like we create a child, like we create a song, like we create anything that comes forth that wasn't there a moment ago. No one else created it. And suddenly it came forth from me. Something as simple as baking cookies, tonight's dinner, calling up a friend that you haven't talked to for a long time. All of those are creative expressions. So today, I'm going to look at another variation of the Christmas story. It's called the 12-step program. Now, you may be thinking, the Christmas story in the 12-step program, I don't get that. But if you really look at the steps of the 12-step program, what is it all about? Creating a sober life. Step number 12 invites people to say that I've had a spiritual experience. That word had, that's the important word here. I've had a spiritual awakening, I believe it says. I've had a spiritual awakening. What is Christmas if it's not a spiritual awakening? And how do we get that spiritual awakening? Step number 11 invites us to improve and to work at the communication between ourselves and a higher power, a God, by whatever name we call him. Isn't that Christmas? Isn't that awakening? Isn't that touching the holy and the divine, this birth with Christmas within us? Isn't that the same thing? You see, we can't have a spiritual awakening unless we are cultivating that divine nature within us. And we cultivate that divine nature, there comes a moment when that seeking, if you will, intersects with an awareness. Oh, really, there's something more in my life. Now, let me couch it in kind of a 12-step idea. The idea that you've moved from the moment when you said, I'm getting sober for my husband, for, the judge that told me I had to, or whatever, and I moved to the place where I say, I'm getting sober for me. My life has got to change. And I'm drawing a line in the sand. That's that spiritual awakening. Who told you that? Where did that come from? It came from deep within you. It was a soul cry that says, let my spirit free. Let me be unencumbered by this alcoholism or whatever the addiction may be. Let me be free. And folks, I might be talking at this moment about alcohol, but we all have our addictions, whatever they are. Addictions to pleasing people, addictions to being right, addictions to the movies, the slot machines. It doesn't really matter. We all have them. And there comes a moment when we cross a line and say, wait a minute, I'm not going to be there anymore. And what begins to happen in that moment is the great creative act of living a different life. It's a creative act. Think about it. When you talk to people in the 12-step programs, they said, the hardest thing to do was to be backed by old friends that drank. Another friend of mine, many, many years ago, when I first really got connected with 12-step programs, and I didn't really understand what they were, and this was like 30 years ago, and I was in a women's group, and we could not believe that this woman was telling us that she had an alcohol problem and that she had been going to AA. And we were like, you? Really? Of course, in the women's group for an hour and a half once a week, we never saw her drink because it wasn't part of our group, okay? But she, in fact, said, yes, that was a problem for her. And we were like, girl, you can do this. You can do this. We're really positive supporting her. And then her year anniversary came. Now, those of you who know what this is going to be know how this goes down. She said, I've got my year chip, and I'm so depressed. And the rest of us sitting there were like, are you kidding? You've done a year. Whoa, this is really great. I'm so excited for you. And she said, no, you don't understand. You see, all year long I've been working to achieve that chip, that one-year chip that says, I've made it. But now what? Because from that moment forward, my new life is without alcohol. It's not like I can say, I've got my year chip now. Now I can go down and buy some Seagrams to celebrate. That's not how it works, is it? So she was saying, and I heard that. We strive so hard. We keep so focused. We work so hard. at whatever it is, and we achieve it to a certain degree, and then we have to say, now this is the new normal. This begins to be that creative life. We have to start living differently. We have to start thinking differently. We have to, maybe sometimes we have to let go of friends that we've held dear. Maybe some of those friends are family friends or spouses, children, whatever it might be. That's a courageous act of living. That's a Christmas story, my friends. But you know, we're not set out adrift. No matter, we all have our issues, whether they're alcohol or something else, it doesn't matter. And sometimes what we do is we struggle with the faith to believe that we're being supported in our journey. That, oh, well, you know, I'm just out here kind of by myself and I'm struggling and it doesn't seem to work. The Apostle Paul had a remedy for such things. Found in his second letter to the Corinthians in chapter 8, he said, grace is sufficient. And I love that. Grace is sufficient. This sense that grace, this unearned, this presence, this power, this love, is simply a gift of the moment. You know, when it says that it's sufficient, I actually looked the word up, and it said enough. The definition of sufficient is enough. Grace is enough. But it's only grace is enough for this moment. You see, it isn't like you say, grace is enough when Amazon Prime appears on Tuesday. I can wait for the grace to show up. Grace doesn't show up after the effect, after the issue, after the challenge. Grace shows up in the moment that it is needed. And how it shows up is just enough. Just enough. See, what happens in our spiritual journey is we like the story of Paul falling off the horse. You know, it's kind of flashy and dazzly. They make movies out of it. But Paul himself doesn't say that's what happened. Paul himself, in his own version of his own story, says, I went out to the desert and was quiet for a while. I know that's hard to believe about Paul, but apparently he did. Nothing flashy. Nothing so boisterous and loud. Grace was just sufficient for the moment, for the journey, for the struggle that he was on. And that's why we want to really, it's that struggle to sort of zone out. It's the struggle to go back to sleep. It's the struggle to not be present. It's the struggle that we constantly have, sort of being overwhelmed, overbombarded, overstimulated by all the externals. Then we need to go back to those quiet places and recognize that the awareness comes in the moment. Grace comes with that awareness in the moment that helps us and supports us as we move through the challenges of our lives. This is really a critical piece of our spiritual unfolding, because what happens is we don't think God is present because things haven't changed, or from our perception they haven't changed. You see, grace shows up enough as we need it in the moment. So it shows up like a distraction. It shows up like, oh, you know, I'm not thirsty for that alcohol I wanted a cup of coffee, a movement, a shift, a change. And at the same time, grace also shows up as a larger circle. I find this to be very, very fascinating. Do you realize that all the healing miracles of Jesus always, always, always become inclusive? In other words, when Jesus goes to heal a person, part of the reason they need healing is because they feel alone. When we are trapped in our addictions, in our depressions, in whatever it might be, we feel alone. We don't want to trouble anybody with our illness. We don't want to, bother people. We want to isolate. There's a term we hear a lot of times. I'm depressed. I want to isolate. And yet true healing is when we come back home, when we come back into the fold. So every time Jesus heals somebody, he brings them back home into the larger community. For example, the woman who had the hemorrhage for 12 years was ostracized from everyone. And what does he do when he touches her? He calls her daughter, implying that she's part of the family. And Jairus' daughter that was healed, he looked at her parents and said, feed her now. She has been healed. What's he implying? Take her down, get her at the table with the rest of the family. She's been included. She's been healed. The 10 lepers, he says, go show yourself to the priest. In other words, you're allowed back into the sanctuary of the temple. And once we become back in, it's amazing how much healing we have because of each other. Why have a 12-step group if not for the healing we give one another? We don't say, oh, you've been healed. That's not it. It's that I understand your journey. I know what you're going through. I have experienced the same thing. And they don't even need to say any words, do they? Why is there cancer support? Why is there grief support? All of these support systems, because I don't need you to preach to me and I don't need you to tell me what to do. I just need you to be by my side and go, I get it. Without words, without actions, just to be beside me when I struggle and I falter. These are the great ways in which we give of our creative gifts. So this is the Christmas story told over and over and over again. Christmas offers us every year the opportunity to come to the story. It's not just the story long ago. It's my story. It's your story. It is our story. It is our story as a community in a world that so needs to be inclusive instead of exclusive. When you breathe out, I breathe in. When I breathe out, someone in the farthest galaxy breathes in. We are all one. We are all interconnected. There's no sense of separation except the separation that we put in our head. And true and lasting healing then can only come when we start to say, come into the family. We are part of the family. We are one with one another. There is no separation. It's a difficult thing, is it not? Because we look at other people, we hear them talk, we encounter them, we engage them, and we go, oh, I don't believe as you believe about X, Y, Z. But what we have to be really, really careful of is we don't exclude them from the community of love. We don't exclude them from the family. They can believe as they believe. They can act as they act. They can do what they want to do, just as reciprocally, I want you to accept me just the way I am. And yet by your presence in my life, hold me accountable. By your presence in my life, include me in yours. By your presence in my life, you help me, you uplift me. And it's true for each and every one of us. The power of intentional community, it's all around us. It is healing. So I hope that these various stories will allow you to see how pervasive the Christmas story really is. How we encounter it in many ways, shapes, and forms. How it holds out an invitation to each and every one of us to discover and explore and express our creative nature. To let go of those confining, narrow definitions of creativity and to rather see that it is the soul of us, it is the depth of us, it is the longing of us trying to give voice and expression to the moment when we've awakened, the moment when we've heard something deep within. We heard it on the wind. We hear it in the music. We see it in a picture. We don't know really what it is, but it lives within us and each and every one of us, and it's drawing something out from us. And the external ultimate manifestation may be a great work of art, may be the most fabulous photograph. It may be the most wonderful thing that ever happened. But that's not the creative spark. The spark is deep within us. The spark is the moment when all of a sudden we realize, maybe it's at dawn or the sunset. Maybe it's walking quietly out in nature. Maybe it's simply sitting in our chair. When we have that moment of grace that's sufficient for whatever we are going through right in that nanosecond, right in that breath. And we begin to say to ourselves, wow, if it's sufficient for that moment, for that need, for that question, then how much greater am I? How much greater is there within me? How much more language do I need to struggle with in order to articulate what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking? How much more is there within each and every one of us? And so each year we come to the Christmas story sort of hard through the year's time. We go, oh, it's been a hard year, it's been a long year, it's been a this year, it's been a that year. And Christmas stands us up again. It says, all right, dust off. Remember that you were born in the creative act of love. And the creative act of love is the ultimate act of creativity. You were born for purpose. You were born for passion. You were born to give and express and to be. And we forget, don't we? We all do. And it's the time when we come back around full circle, once again, to the moment of the divine spark exploding within us, giving voice and language to the beauty, to the message, to the purpose, to the life that we are called to be. Thank you for joining me today, and God bless.